We have been, since basically the first week of January, doing a series on ritual. It's not a word that gets tossed around a lot in Adventist circles. We're not the smells and bells type of church, as we say, unfortunately, somewhat pejoratively sometimes. We have simple sanctuaries, and for decades, the Adventist churches, none of them had crosses in them even. And today you find many crosses in North American or United States churches that are Adventist. But there's no real iconography. There's unless we've purchased a building with stained glass that comes from an era in which there would be a Bible text or a symbol or something, we just don't have a liturgical sort of setting. So the word rituals doesn't get used very much, and we don't think in terms of the ways in which we symbolically represent something, which we do in the Adventist church. There are a number of symbolic representations. And one of the things that ritual is really good about is whether it's an individual practice, a personal sort of routine, as it were, and I would almost classify a personal ritual as a routine or a habit rather than a ritual. Rituals are public. They're things that we do corporately many times, or involve another member of the community. So while you can go home and wash your own feet, it's not the same as having your feet washed in a communion service. While you can go home and bake your own bread, it's not the same as sharing the elements of the communion, the unleavened bread and the juice, with people who believe. You can have your own meal at home. It's not the same as sitting together at a table and experiencing the hospitality and the joy of being in a circle of people that you know and love, or that you're just getting acquainted with, perhaps, for the first time. Community does something that is powerful in our lives and in our spiritual journeys. We need one another. And while Americanism would like to deny that fact, we're very individualistic, very pull ourselves up by the bootstrap type people, very strong, independent, etc. Truth is, we really need each other. Truth is, our lives are intertwined in ways that we don't always even comprehend. And so I've been talking about water rituals, I've been talking about communion, I've been talking about a number of things in relationship to ritual. And the launch off was ritual instead of New Year's Eve or New Year's resolution. Why try to transform yourself in a moment of promise? I know that every year I fail to be the Übermensch I was called to be. That's Superman in German. In other words, my pledge to lose 25 pounds, to be able to run the mile in under 8 minutes, to complete a book or a certain number of things, or to do whatever my goals might be, inevitably fall by the wayside because discipline is sometimes an issue, and circumstances constantly shift. Things constantly change on us. So the point, too, of ritual is something that gently moves us toward transformation individually and together, ideally moving us toward the life and the practice of Jesus Christ. And today I'm going to talk about rituals of grief and mourning and loss, and we're going to read together John chapter 11, the quintessential chapter on this in the New Testament. Now, a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. This Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay sick, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. So the sisters sent word to Jesus, "Lord, the one you love is sick." Jesus, your dear friend, is not doing well. When he heard this, Jesus said, "This sickness will not end in death. No, it's for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it." Now, this edited edition from John's perspective recounts a way in which Jesus anticipated something that we, as Paul says, place our hope in, and that's resurrection life. Otherwise, Jesus is making a prophecy which becomes flatly false. It did end in death, just not long term. Verse 5, Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus, yet when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. Then he said to his disciples, "Let us go back to Judea." "But Rabbi," they said, "a short while ago the Jews tried to stone you, and yet you're going to go back there." Jesus answered, "Are there not 12 hours of daylight? A man who walks by day will not stumble, for he sees by this world's light. It is when he walks by night that he stumbles, for he has no light." After he said this, he went on to tell them, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I am going there to wake him up." His disciples replied, "Lord, if he sleeps, he will get better." Jesus had been speaking of his death, but the disciples thought he meant natural sleep. So then Jesus told them plainly, "Lazarus is dead, and for your sake I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe, but let us go to him." Then Thomas, called Didymus, said to the rest of the disciples, "Let us also go, that we may die with him." These disciples had some distorted views of the way things worked. Verse 17, on his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. "Lord," Martha said to Jesus, "if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." And Martha answered, "I know that he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live, and even though he dies, and whoever lives and believes in me in this will never die. Do you believe this?" "Yes, Lord," she said to him. "I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who was to come into the world." And after she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary aside. "The teacher is here," she said, "and is asking for you." When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet entered the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who had been with Mary in the house, comforting her, noticed how quickly she got up and went out, they followed her, supposing that she was going to the tomb to mourn there. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved and troubled. "Where have you laid him?" he asked. "Come and see, Lord," they replied. Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, "See how he loved him?" But some of them said, "Could he not, who have opened the eyes of the blind man, have kept this man from dying?" Verse 38, Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. "Take away the stone," he said. "But Lord," said Martha, the sister of the dead man, "By this time there's a bad odor, for he's been there for 4 days." Then Jesus said, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I know that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of people standing here, that they may believe you have sent me." When he had said this, Jesus called in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. Jesus said to them, "Take off the grave clothes and let him go." It's a miracle story. It's a resurrection story. It's a story in which a tragic event is turned into a joyful one. It's a story in which a loss once experienced is reversed. It's the story of restoration of a man to life and to his family and to his friends. It's a story of a Messiah whose powers were beyond the norm, of a God made flesh who not only created and not only forgave and redeemed, but a God in whom there was life and who had within him the powers to restore life. So there are a couple things that I want to point out. In this story, there are no professional mourners, at least not in the text itself. It's very possible that there were, because in ancient times, funerary services in biblical times were not so much driven by theological belief, but they were driven by local custom and practice. So one of the things that was really important that came down from patriarchal times was, you'll recall that when Abraham died, Isaac needed to bury him and purchased the land where the cave of Machpelah was and laid his father in the cave, in the tomb. And it became a burial spot for the ancestors. In Jewish times, they had the practice usually of dealing with death quickly, because the temperatures were such, the climate was such, that things deteriorated very quickly. So when a person died, they might be put into a very shallow grave, spices, oils might be put upon them. Usually the branches of a tree would be laid upon the body. And the tradition was to let nature take its course and reduce the body to bones. And then the bones were collected and placed in what's called an ossuary, which was a small box. And you find these all over Israel. There are ossuaries everywhere. And so that was how they dealt with death. If you had more means, more resources, you might be in a sealed space, like a cave or a tomb cut out of rock. And we see in Lazarus's placement in a tomb cut out of rock with a rolling seal or stone in front of it, something that foreshadows Jesus' own death and being laid in a tomb. But Lazarus has clearly been cared for. When he's passed, strips of cloth were wrapped around him, face cloth put over him, the spices, the expensive frankincense and myrrh and these kinds of things were poured on the bandages, on the wrappings, so that the odor would be contained. And you see even them expressing concern at the decay of the body as Jesus arrives. A couple of other things in the text that are interesting. It was common, there was no set time for mourning, but Jewish custom today is 7 days, a week of mourning. And what people do today is sit Shiva with someone who has lost a loved one. And the formulation for this is that the one who is mourning has been laid low. I will tell you today, I feel laid low. I know many of you do too. And so the laid low person, the person in mourning, would sit on a low stool so that people could come and offer condolences or sit Shiva with them, a practice of just being in silence with them. It was a practice that honored grief. It was a practice that remembered the person that had passed. It's a practice that was community-based. It was a practice that expressed love and respect. Sitting Shiva is a ritual that exists to this day. And while we don't have record of paid mourners, the paid mourners performed a special function too, often women in the village who specialized in this. What their cries did was bring a community together and express community grief. What their cries did was make it okay for the family to show emotion and people experiencing pain to emote it and let it out. What the mourners did enabled the community as a whole to connect with this person, this situation of loss, and internalize, make external what was internalized, express their grief. So there's a group gathered in Bethany, and Jesus shows up on the fourth day, and they're still mourning. People have been sitting with Martha and Mary. I don't know if they organized a food train and were bringing dishes by, but the family was there supported in their home, not far from where Lazarus was laid. When we move forward to modern times, I was reflecting even last week on Mary Carey's service. We were in a funeral home, a place designed, as it were, for these kinds of things. A little alcove at the front, the neon-lit Christ on the cross on the wall. Beneath it, a beautiful casket, airbrushed and painted in pink for the femininity of the person who had passed, with flowers on every corner, and live flowers too, cut flowers and live flowers around the casket. Huge spray on the casket lid. In this particular service, viewing was possible, and the lid was opened, and one could go up and gaze upon Mary's face. Tranquil, still, peaceful, gone. Some people bent over and wept. Some people reached out to touch the hand. Some people put an envelope inside with a message. People expressed their grief. And at some point, the invitation was made, does anyone else want to come forward? And when it was silent, the lid was closed, the spray of flowers put on top, and the services moved elsewhere. In the space was a lectern, a place to hold a Bible for people to hear from the scriptures and to be comforted by God's words and message. Space for a pastor of any denomination to speak words of comfort and care. There was an electronic candle, and I wish it weren't so. It, to my eyes, always feels a bit tacky, but I understand the fire restrictions that we have in our world and risks. But it's that the light does not go out. The candle continues to burn. The light is still present in the world. And while one individual's light has gone out, we still move forward. We move graveside and hear the routines of culture and burial were also manifest. The grave had been pre-dug in keeping with Western culture and American sanitary procedures and so forth. There was a cement liner. Casket was lowered into that at some point after words had been said of hope. And there was one of the funeral advisors there with a bucket of dirt. Reach in and put a handful on the casket. The old saying goes, dust to dust and ashes to ashes. We were raised up from this soil, from this earth, and we go back to it. And so people participated. Not everyone wanted to grab a handful of dirt, but all of us also had flowers we could throw. Moment of beauty shared, recognition of finality and loss. And after prayers, we left that place and we went and ate. We sat at tables, we had good food, we shared with one another, we laughed, we remembered, because we're still living. That's the really hard part, isn't it? On the one hand, life has come to a moment of close, and on the other, we're still living. What rituals of death and mourning do is connect us to at least the body, if not the person that's passed. Keep memory flowing through our minds. Help us to recount what we have hope and faith in. Help us to remember that there are those that have gone before us. Help us remember that we are still here together. And that while we can show our love symbolically for the one who has passed, it's our job now to show our love for those that still live and to provide for them and to bless them and to comfort them and to feed them and to make sure life goes on. John chapter 11 is also imbued with a number of theological points. And I take comfort in this. If you ask me why I'm an Adventist, it has changed a bit over the years, but I have always appreciated the Seventh-day Adventist stance on the separation of church and state. So some of us who are aware of that are also in a deeper mourning for the larger context of what's happening for our country. But the separation of church and state ensured that if the state was secular and yet not interfering with or enabling either one religious expression, then I was truly free to worship God as I pleased. And the church's understanding of that and advocacy for that made me proud. One of the other reasons was our stance or our understanding of what happens when someone passes. We take it straight from here. Jesus said, Lazarus has gone to sleep, and the disciples said, well, okay, that's fine, then he'll wake up. Jesus had to be more explicit with them. No, I mean that he is dead. But if Jesus calls death asleep, then we can too. And in this moment, what we see is that Jesus is able, after 4 days of heat and deterioration, after 4 days of people mourning, after already being wrapped in grave clothes and covered in perfumes and oils, he can speak and life returns. See this in the Genesis account. I'm not here to comment on the scientific validity or the order of days or any of these sorts of things. I'm here to tell you that our text tells us God created, and he did so by speaking, except when it came to humankind. He formed humankind from the dust of the earth and breathed into humankind the breath of life. You see, God gives us life, and the life that he gives us returns to him. The energy of life that God gives us returns to him. The breath that we borrow from God returns to him. And the body that we have inhabited, that we are, turns to dust. It happens again and again and again. And what Jesus has done in the story of Lazarus is insert himself into a very normal process to show us, as it says in the passage, the power of God. Because if we sleep, we can be awakened. Mark sleeps, and he can be awakened. Mark is dead, but even in death, Mark will be able to hear the voice of God, his Creator, who one day will say, "Get up, come out." We also have theologies of culture, not culture, but community here. It's right that we should mourn. The Bible never said not to mourn. The Bible said never to not to weep. No, it says Jesus wept. The Bible never said for us not to feel sad or down, low for a while. It's very normal. But the Bible also calls us to a culture of shared grief, where together we remember, where together we cry, where together we look forward. What I want to remind us of from the theology that we've just explored before we heard the individual words. Mark, you heard, was a Sabbath school teacher. Sound guy, I think probably a deacon somewhere once. He's on our treasury team. This young man studied and he chose to remain an Adventist and be in the church and active in the church. One of the things he understood was that Jesus was the resurrection and the life. And one of the things that I loved about and still love about being an Adventist, but I'm worried at the slippage, is the clarity that our body goes to dust, our spirit goes back to God who gave it, and we just aren't until Jesus puts it all back together again. That's what the resurrection is. I'm comforted that Mark isn't in heaven staring down at us right now. I'm comforted that he's in the arms of Jesus. And that when God is ready and Christ comes, he'll be called forth. That's what an Adventist believes. That when Jesus comes again, he and many that we've lost will be called forth. We call it that great getting up morning from the spiritual, the line in the spiritual. And we say, fare thee well. In that great getting up morning, fare thee well. We're going to end with that. We're going to have our final song, our final prayer. And then we're going to go eat together because we're still here, because we're alive. And we're going to think to ourselves, what does resurrection life look like for those of us who yet live? What is it that God is calling us to step into and to do? How is it that God wants to use us in the remaining time that we have? For death spares no one, not even the promised Messiah. And no servant is greater than his master, and so as Jesus took up the cross and laid down his life, the invitation comes to us not in a self-flagellating way, but in a very practical way. What does it look like to bear one another's burdens? What does it look like to follow Jesus in this moment? And to commit ourselves to our community and to the day that Jesus shall come? This is the question.